I'm Natalie Metza Garcia, and welcome to the Floating Cities Show. Here, you learn about the latest floating projects, developments, houses, buildings, neighborhoods, floating city plans, and the regulations, zones, and jurisdictions that enable them all across the world. You'll hear directly from the makers, the architects, designers, developers, engineers, and even the regulators that make floating projects possible. Come join me while together with Seaphia, we help you navigate the complexity of these new waters. Hello, everyone. We are here with Mitchell Sochner, who is going to talk to us today about Arkide and the projects that they have going on. He's right now in the Philippines. How are you, Mitchell? And what are you doing in the Philippines?
I'm doing good. The weather here is great. It's a lot warmer than Michigan, and
Yeah.
I'm I'm over here because we've been working since around about January is when it really started. But I got to the Philippines in March to build the Arkpad, which so the company is Arkpad. There's actually two companies. They're sister companies that are related, Arktide and Arkpad. So I'm with Arkpad here in the Philippines building the Arkpad C. Well, I guess let me start by just talking about what that platform is. Um, so the Arkpad is basically this, you can imagine it not necessarily as a floating house, but almost as floating real estate that has utilities built into it. So it's a flat platform where you can build a house on top, whatever kind of structure you want that would fit on top of this 10-meter by 10-meter square platform. And it can carry up to 10 metric tons, and it's designed to handle 3-meter waves in the case of the Arkpad C, the coastal unit, without bending or flexing or potentially being damaged in those kind of larger storm waves. We'll come out with bigger versions later on that can handle much bigger waves than 3 meters tall, like 5 meters tall or 6 meters tall. But that's where we're starting for right now.
Cool. And how did you get to the determination that 10 meters times 10 meters was the right size?
Honestly, it was just a nice round number, and it's also the largest beams that we can fit inside of a shipping container. So if we want to disassemble an individual unit and then send it somewhere else in the world, so let's say that we're building these in the Philippines, and someone in Brazil wants to buy one, or Colombia, or South Africa, wherever, right, wherever the location is, we could either tow one across the ocean, or we could disassemble it, put it in the shipping container, and then send it off to that person. And of course, a 10-meter long girder that makes up part of the platform of this Arkpad could just go inside of a 40-foot container, and so it's very easy to ship. It's much easier to handle that way.
And hi, Mitchell. I was looking at the videos and the structure of the platform. Please correct me. I see that there is one that is going to go above water, that is actually not like touching the ocean, but is at a certain height, so the waves are not going to have much impact. But there is also like a submerged platform, correct? That there is a part of this Arkpad that also does good things for the ocean underneath. Now that you're talking about the shipping, please tell us a little bit more about that other part of the Arkpad, and how do you handle that, or do you plan to handle that? For example, if the client is at a long distance, it comes to mind, yeah, how do you also send that part that goes underneath?
So that's a good question. So basically, the whole structure is the whole Arkpad. It's just kind of three individual pieces that are copies of each other. So on the one hand, you have the spar, and that's the long hollow tube that gives us buoyancy. Then you have the floater, which is the kind of round donut thing that goes around the spar. And then you have the platform on top, which can be, that's just girders, right? That can be disassembled and reassembled and so on and so forth. So you can take the whole thing apart. Sometimes I like to talk about the Arkpad like it's Legos of ocean real estate. You can just mix and match each piece and build whatever you want, if it's a floating resort or a floating residential area, whatever. But every Arkpad individually can also come apart, and is kind of made in this modular way.
So there's
Okay.
the spar, which are the poles. Then I see the donuts underneath.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yeah.
even though it seems like it has the structure of an oil rig, for example, it is
Mhm.
floating, right?
Oh yeah, it's floating. And a lot of oil rigs are, attached to the seafloor. There are
Yeah.
some oil rigs that are also floating. This one is, it's somewhat similar to an oil rig when you first look at it, but one major difference that some people don't consider is that in oil rig, if you're only using spars, which are these hollow tubes that you see coming out of the surface of the water, those need to go down. They need to be pretty deep. They need to go down for quite a ways before you can achieve really good stability and deal with waves. So by having those round donuts that are under the surface, you can actually make the spar a lot shallower, a lot shorter, and then you can bring these things right up close to the shore while still having all of the same stability of those free floating oil rigs that people see that are meant for really deep water.
Cool. And how are you going to attach each platform to each other?
So that's another thing that I think we're going to come out with a video detailing how that's going to work out. But right now we're working on an individual unit. So when we come out with our prototype, it's just going to be one standalone Arkpad by itself. We're going over a few different connection mechanisms. We have a lot of things in mind. One thing is a tensegrity style connection type, but I won't get into that right now because it's a little bit complicated. But one thing that we are going to do when these are able to connect to each other is, while one unit is going to be stable on its own, by connecting a whole bunch of Arkpads together and forming a floating resort or a floating residential community or what have you, it's automatically going to create a kind of power and water grid. And so each house is going to be able to share its electricity and its fresh water and even run an internet cable to all of the connecting homes. And so you have this kind of network, this power and water grid, an internet grid that everyone can connect into or plug out of when they leave.
That's very cool. And we were reading about one very specific material that you have been developing. I'm not sure if that is like Arkpad or maybe mainly on Arkide, like the sister company, but about the seastead cement, that it's like a new material. I was very curious about it. If you would like to tell us about this specific material for this seastead construction, please.
Yeah. So actually, that one I've been really involved with since day one. As soon as I got to the Philippines in March, we started working with a concrete company to develop a specific kind of concrete to deal with the problems that we'd be facing when we're building a floating house. So the first thing to realize is, let's go back to the oil rigs for a second. If you're going to build an oil rig in the middle of the ocean and it's going to be huge, you could have 2 inches solid steel, and it's going to take a long, long time for that to rust. But if you want something that can give a person their own home or give a family their own home in a residential area that they can move around freely to wherever they want, right? It's going to be a lot smaller than an oil rig, as we know. So using steel means that it could corrode rather quickly, and then you're going to get holes in the spar and it's not going to float. That's going to be a problem. So the first thing that we said was we need to find a material that's going to be lower cost than steel to make it affordable to the average person, and that also isn't going to rust through and get holes in it, that's going to have a longer lifespan. So the first thing we thought of is, well, what if we use concrete? So we did structural analysis. We looked at it from a perspective, an engineering perspective, and we said we can get better materials than this. So seasteading cement is mostly like concrete, but it has lots of things added into it that are going to make it actually even better at resisting saltwater corrosion. Concrete will eventually crumble over time. Seasteading cement won't. It will last for centuries.
So it's
It
like
has
reinforced concrete?
it's like
In a way?
concrete that doesn't have to have reinforcement. It's like
Mm.
it's even better than that. It's got these and I'm not going to share the formula right now, but it can almost bend. You could take a thing of concrete that thick, right? It's like my hand, and if
Yeah,
you try to bend it, it's going to crack. But if you
yeah.
do it with seasteading cement, it's not going to do that because it's got more kind of push to it.
Okay, more flexible. Interesting.
Yeah.
Can you say what it has, even if you don't say the formula?
I can't say what it has right now because we haven't patented it.
Okay, I understand. I understand. And can you tell us a bit about where you're testing it, how you're testing it, how you came to it, even if you don't mention what it has?
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's a concrete testing facility here in the Philippines, in the capital city. And so we took samples. There are these blocks that are about this big of the stuff, and we bring them in to be tested on their machines. They have these compressive strength machines that crush a cylinder. They have these flexural strength machines that will try to crack a block of it in half. And the
Yes.
last several blocks that we put in, the machine got to its weight limit and it couldn't crack the block, so they just had to take them out.
Oh, cool. Oh, cool.
Wow.
Okay.
So it
Right.
it goes beyond what the machine can even test for.
And
Oh,
and this I read on the website, then it's public information. I hope I'm not being like imprudent, but so it really called also my attention. The name of the seaweed that the Sargasso sea. I don't know if that is it's a type of seaweed. I understand. And that maybe because you have discovered all these many uses that it may have, like for food harvesting, but also for nutrients on other types of crops, and that it may actually work for these type of materials that you are developing, right? That it may give it also some sort of natural qualities that help in a system.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there are some materials that we can get directly out of seawater that would allow people to, you've probably heard of secrete or biorock. There are materials we can get out of seawater that can help make seasteading cement. There are materials that we can get out of seaweed. Um, we could make most of it renewably, not 100% of it, but of
okay.
course, if we tweak the formula, then eventually you can make most of what you need to produce seasteading cement fully in the ocean. In fact, one thing that we tried to do was we decided to just swap out fresh water with salt water when we were curing the thing, and that worked out just fine, and it still had 3 times the strength of normal concrete. So you could build these
Okay.
structures hypothetically in the middle of the ocean.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what was the design inspiration for this particular house that we are seeing here? It's a single
So
family
the
home?
Oh yeah, yeah. Our goal is that not just people who are willing to invest a lot of money, but the average person can turn around one day and just say, "Hey, I want to buy a floating house," and they can give everyone access to. Right? I mean, seasteading cement is also not quite the same cost as concrete, but it's pretty low. It's close. It's a lot cheaper than steel. Um, So part of that process of making it affordable is making it well engineered. So what we did was we took a proposed design and we put it into a wave simulation. And we just simulated how large storm waves would act on this structure again and again and again. I think we've done about we did probably about 40 or 50 different simulations of different designs until we kind of found that this one was one of the most stable and one of the
Okay.
easiest to build. And so that's how
Okay.
we got to the shape.
Ah, nice.
You have mentioned, and of course, the idea of a seastead usually is planned, or the idea is that it is in the middle of the ocean. Maybe it's like out of the regular nation states jurisdictions. Of course,
Yeah.
as long as I mean, as much information as you can share and as you feel comfortable. But if you could share it with us, how are you thinking about dealing with permissions or with government regulations. Are these projects also thought maybe to be a bit closer to shore, like within let's say the space at the sea that belongs to a nation, or the idea is to make it completely independent, and how do you plan to get there?
Right. Good question. So we want to go in both directions at the same time. We actually want to be able to fill every niche. And the easiest thing to do is to start near the coast, right? So that's why we had this design called the Arkpad. And that's the one you've probably seen on Arktide's website. And then the Arkpad C, well, the C is for coastal. So this one is supposed to come closer into the coast, into those territorial waters. Our one of our early ways that we're going to be kind of testing these structures is that we want to build floating resorts for tourists to stay in. But eventually, when we do go into deep sea and we have a more deep sea oriented design that can handle bigger waves, one idea that I've been floating around is to work with
Floating
the
around.
United Nations. Right? Pun not intended.
Floating around.
Yeah. So anyways, one idea that I had also was actually that there are a lot of people in Southeast Asia. This is kind of a Southeast Asian thing that are refugees that are looking to get resettled into other locations. One of the difficulties that they face is they don't have a kind of a way station to stop at before their resettlement process begins. So by putting one of these large residential areas in the middle of the ocean in international waters, you can actually create a haven for refugees to stay in while they're in the process of being resettled.
Yeah, I love that idea actually. I was talking to Michael Castlemiller, a couple of months ago, well, more than a couple of months ago, who was the person who wrote the paper on refugee cities, about how, yeah, about the idea. And he said that one of the main challenge, and I love the idea, by the way, for example, putting it in the Mediterranean would be such a great idea. Or between the north of Africa and South Europe, that would have saved so many lives.
So
And he
many
was
lives.
mentioning one of the challenges is funding, right? Because
Hmm.
you have to make it a sustainable business model. So how are you planning to tackle, maybe not the refugee aspect of it, because that might be more down the line, but how are you financing this project?
Good question. So, like I said, when we started with this deep sea model and then we wanted to go to a shallow water model, part of the reasoning for that is because there is a lot more business along the coast. There are a lot more established companies like resorts. And so, by turning around and saying, okay, excuse me for a second. So, by turning around and saying, uh, let's build a floating resort. That even resorts that are just built on stilts out over the water generally tend to be pretty popular. Something like this, a resort completely floating in the ocean, maybe a kilometer or 2 kilometers off the coast, I think is going to be a really big tourist draw. So that right there is going to be able to sell a lot of floating houses. And once they've been proven in that kind of environment, then they can be sold to people as individual homes for residential purposes. And then, like I said, when we have a lot of funding from resort and tourism income, maybe we could pivot and start looking at refugee cities.
Nice. I love, by the way, the fact that you put the golf carts because it hints in that direction. Even some of the Maldives resorts on stilts, they have some little golf carts there. So I love that.
Yeah.
We just have to make them energy sustainable, electric golf carts,
Right. Well, if you notice
like
on the
nets.
top of these, they all have solar panels on every Arkpad here. So that kind of goes back to that idea that I had of we'll give the resort its own power grid. It's generating its own solar by day and then wind and wave by night. And so it has this renewable energy that it's always producing. You plug your golf cart in at night and it's electric and you can go in the morning, go wherever you want to. And some people, when they watch this video, when we put it out on social media, they were, some people in the comments were like, why are there golf carts? This place is tiny. You can just walk everywhere. So,
I
I didn't think about that right away, because I was thinking about, what if we have 500 of these, then you'd probably need a golf cart.
Yeah, no, I completely get you. I thought the same. It's small, but this is a design. It's like a prototype design. So I see it in both ways. It's small, you can walk anywhere, but also you are hinting to the larger goal
Mhm.
that you have. I get it. Yeah.
And then still within a city or resort, I think that it's smart to think that there will be people or situations that will require some mobility like solutions, so
Yeah.
some accessories. And tell us a little bit more about what will happen also underneath these structures, because that's what you also want to promote as a way to take care of the ocean, like taking advantage of it, but at the same time giving back to it.
Yes, yes. So the aquaculture and polyculture aspect of these seasteads is something that we wanted to fit into the structure from day one. So going back to those wave simulations, we decided whatever wave simulation shape, whatever shape for the seastead comes out being the best, we won't necessarily go with number one. We'll also go with the one that allows for the best use of aquaculture. So in this instance, the one that we picked is these spars are capable of having kind of a netted floor. And so by having a sort of a marine net and pulling that tight, you can create an artificial seafloor, kind of this lower layer of the city. And on that seafloor, you could have all kinds of things. You can have when it gets kind of covered over, you can have mussels, oysters, fish. You could actually have crabs and lobsters. You can have all kinds of things over there, and it's creating an additional habitat more than what previously existed. Because if you move this into water that's, let's say, a kilometer deep, some of those creatures can't live in water that deep. So you're actually expanding the habitat, you're expanding the environment in which those animals can live. And we actually have a plan, of course, of growing seaweed and increasing marine productivity that way. But more, even farther than that, the seasteading cement can be used as a kind of an anchor point for corals. Now, this is a little ways further out, but eventually we'll be able to grow our own coral reefs on the bottoms of these. That's something we don't haven't put any focus on just yet, but we'll do that when we get to the floating resorts.
Oh, but you can outsource that. There's companies that are fully focused on doing that, like Reefy, for example. That's what they
Really?
do. So you don't need to redesign the wheel, but simply go to those teams that have already done it before. And I think they are maybe this is I'm mixing things up, but I think they are interested in doing it in Panama.
In
I
Panama,
think,
okay, because
yeah,
I know
although
there's
I
a few
think that
companies.
the prototype
No,
is
go
in the
ahead, go ahead.
Netherlands.
Okay. Yeah, I know there's a few companies that are doing coral reef restoration in Singapore and Malaysia, and they're very close to us. And I think that there's a few in the Philippines also. So I know there's other companies that we would partner with when we get to the coral reef restoration aspect. That would probably come along the same time that we build a floating resort. So right now, because we're at step one, just build a single prototype. We're still a little ways away from there, but we'll definitely want partners when we get to that stage.
Nice. And how are you choosing the final location, or you're not there yet?
We're not quite there yet. We're still um, finalizing our location to build the prototype. So we've actually signed a couple leases, a lease here in the capital city for a small office, a lease in another city a little further away in a place called La Union. And we're trying to find the exact right spot to construct that first prototype. But we believe that once we build the first prototype, will start getting attention from these coastal resorts that want to build floating expansions onto what they already have. And so from my position, from my perspective at least, I think that once we build that first prototype, things will actually start rolling pretty fast. We'll start producing in larger numbers, the cost is going to come down, and then maybe other people can start looking and saying, hey, I'm not in Southeast Asia, but I want to have a floating house too.
This is something that I think has to do with Arkide. I don't know how much Arkpad is involved in this, but it really blew my mind that you were competing or participating in a competition that will, well, actually have companies that will try to extract or to, maybe I'm not using the right word, but basically you are going to get carbon, extract carbon from the bottom of the ocean, and that's going to have actually uses for clean energy and, well, many other things. You think, Mitchell, that would fit in this interview, and tell us a bit about it as well, please?
Sure. So that's a project that we started around the time that I got to the Philippines, and we were working with Arkide at that time. Now, Arktide's kind of taken over on that side since then, and we're not as involved anymore. But I can tell you what I did when I was involved in it, when the Arkpad team was involved in it. The idea is, I think we even came up with these little, kind of squares where we were going to take that sargassum seaweed, we were going to put them in these kind of floating. I guess these floating, not cases is not the right word, the kind of like these wire meshes that would float on the surface of the
Okay.
water, and the seaweed would grow in that mesh, and you could kind of surround the arc pad with it, so you'd have this kind of field of seaweed around a city or along the seawall. And the idea is, because that sargassum and other species of seaweed grow so much faster and suck so much carbon out of the water and the atmosphere, that you could, when you scale that up, extract a lot more carbon than with most land-based methods. And of course, in the process, you're also producing food and materials that can be used to produce seasteading cement. So then you're also growing the city in the process.
Cool. So, am I wrong in thinking that this wall that you have that has like the wood panels is somehow Asian inspired? Because
Yes,
the
it
goal is to
is.
make it, okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I like the mix of modern, the white, the glass with the more traditional wood paneling aspect.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually just a traditional kubo house here in the Philippines. So those are especially popular
Oh.
over in La Union, where we're looking at building the prototype.
When you say cubo, you mean CUBO, like cube?
Yeah, kubo.
Oh, nice. That's a
Yeah,
word in
and
Spanish.
oh, I didn't realize that. I've been picking up on some Tagalog, but it's been a long time since I did Spanish in high school.
Don't worry, it's been a long time since I speak Spanish too. No, yeah, cubo. There's a lot of Spanish words in the Philippines. So, what do you want our listeners and viewers to know about your project?
Well, I mean, we've put out so much stuff on social media, but the thing you got to realize is, for everything we put out on social media, there's so much more going on behind the scenes. We're working on making these things safe. That's probably our number one priority. We're working on making them affordable so that the average person can have them. Again, some people think floating houses, floating cities, I could never afford to live there, but that's not the way that we want this to be. Um, I guess the main takeaway, and of course we want them to be green and use a lot of renewable energy, at least 90%. Um, I guess the main takeaway is, if you're watching this show, you're probably already aware of floating cities and seasteading as a movement. But if this is the first time that you're seeing this, and you just found out about seasteading and you're interested in the concept, then you should give a lot of thought to, where do you want to live in the future? Because I think that with the Arkpads, we're going to be building floating cities very, very soon.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Mitchell, for being here today and talking to us. We look forward to seeing them and hopefully visiting them in a few years down the line, less than 10.
I would say we'll have resorts within the next year or two, fingers crossed, and then maybe a full refugee city within 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised.
Awesome. Well, we're trying to do the third season of the Floating Cities show in person. So maybe we can visit.
Hey, Yeah,
That
let's
would
do it in
be
a floating city.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mitchell. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your work day, and we look forward to sharing this with our audience.
Thank you. You as well.